This podcast is owned and operated by the RCR Association, a private third party to the Department of National Defense. The content of this podcast is the responsibility of the RCR Association and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Government of Canada. The official emblems of the regiment are used with the permission of Regimental Headquarters, the RCR. Well, you know what? Before we even get into this conversation, I just want to welcome our guest today. A very amazing person, I would like to say, that is involved with the Regimental Association.
Yeah, so the Petawawa branch of the Upper Ottawa Valley RCR Association.
Right on. Sergeant retired Greg Tate.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
This is a very familiar place for you.
It is, yeah. It was like pulling up. I'm like, oh, there's all these cars out here. And then I'm like, I can pull right up front.
Right on. So you were telling us that right now we're filming in the DSM's conference room through RCR, and leading into it, there's like office spaces, and that used to be the MIR.
The MIR, yeah.
Wow. There used to be its own MIR in the battalion.
Yep.
That's neat.
Actually, I had something excised out of my thigh, like a growth excised out of my thigh, like a lipoma or something like that, right in the room next door.
No way.
Yeah.
What is that?
So lipoma is just a big ball of fat.
Ah.
Yeah, we had been out on exercise for the week, and I come in and I'm in my long johns and not really sleeping and eating a lot and almost passed out while they were taking her out of the air.
That's wild. Wow, so there used to be an MO stationed here as well. Or posted, I should say. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, right now it's hard enough to get medics, let alone having a full cadre of medical team.
Well, yeah, and you guys have to now go over to the base hospital, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of changes, eh?
A lot of changes, yeah.
So, Greg, please tell us about when you joined the military.
I joined the military in 1985. I wrote my last exam in high school in 1984.
Where'd you grow up?
Cambridge, Ontario.
Oh, okay.
So wrote my last exam, and I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? And went to a recruiting center in Kitchener and started the process. My dad actually had to sign the papers because I wasn't 18 yet. And then February 85, started in Cornwallis. Came to Petawawa to the RCR Battle School, and from April to August, did my TQ3 infantry training here. Then got posted to 2 RCR and went down.
Where was that?
That was Gagetown.
Okay, they were in Gagetown.
Gagetown, yeah. And so got posted to Gulf Company down there, and then had a couple of different jobs there, like C2 gunner or truck driver, that kind of thing. And then got my jump course. And
While you were with the 2nd Battalion?
yeah, while I was with the 2nd Battalion. And from there...
What year is this right now?
85?
85.
86. 86, I got my jump course, because my basic course was 8506, and my jump course was 8606.
Okay.
That's how I remember the numbers. And then while we were in Norway on exercise Brave Line, which was a 5 Brigade exercise, got my posting message to come to Petawawa, and then came here to the Airborne Regiment, to 3 Commando, did 4 years in 3 Commando, 2 years in Recce Platoon, and then went over to 1 RCR when they closed London. And then went to the Airborne Holding Unit, which became 3 RCR, and then retired from the Leadership School.
Whoa. So that's a lot right there. First of all, I just want to say that this is awesome because you are, I think, my first ever guest that served in the Airborne Regiment. And there's a lot I'd like to ask you about that because it's so fascinating to me because like the regiment is no longer here, technically speaking. And so all my understanding of it is secondhand, right?
Okay.
So I've never witnessed the regiment in its existence other than through senior leadership that have expressed their service in it. Now, I want to ask you, first of all, you volunteered for the Airborne Commando.
Absolutely.
How did it work? Please tell me about what you knew about the Airborne Regiment before you got there.
I can remember when I was in high school, there was an article in the Toronto Sun about an exercise that happened probably in the Meaford area. And
This is in the 80s we're talking?
yeah, this is in the 80s, and it was like, okay, that's what I want to do. And
What was it saying? You remember?
no, it just he was like a full page spread that had photos and everything, and it was okay. This is something I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then when as soon as I got to 2 RCR, there was a bunch of us that from my TQ3 course that we all ended up on the jump course together. And then from there, we all got posted here together.
Can you tell me about your jump course? Like, who were the cadre there?
CABC, Canadian Airborne Center.
Was it staffed by Airborne Regiment members?
Airborne Regiment.
So this is where you're being exposed to them?
So, yeah, for the very first time, absolutely.
Okay.
And so all those guys like Monkey McNeil is a name that stands out. He was a Patricia, so he had been in 2 Commando. So all the instructors that we had been in the regiment at some point in time, because you would do your jump master course, then you would do your PI course, and then there was the opportunity to get posted to CABC out in Edmonton.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So you made this reference that 2 Commando was affiliated with the Patricias. I'm asking you a lot, and we're kind of fracturing this like a bit, but can you explain to us how the Airborne Regiment was kind of formed and its affiliations?
So in my time, there was 1 Commando, which was the Vandus, 2 Commandos, which was the Patricias, and 3 Commando was RCR. And then there was your Airborne and Headquarters and Signal Squad Commando, and that comprised of Recce Platoon, your mechanics, medics, Service Commando was mechanics, medics, and that. Headquarters and SIGs was your Headquarters Commando, Mortar Platoon, Recce Platoon, and Anti-Armor Platoon. And those support platoons would have been made up of soldiers from all of the commandos. So like when I was in Recce Platoon, there was all of us. We were 1, 2, and 3 Commando. And then when we needed, we would get a medic in from Service Commando.
Where were you guys located? All in Petawawa?
Z-Line. So basically out where the parking lot is now, that was Z-Lines.
So you guys had a building right there.
So we had our buildings right here. So 3 Commando had a building, 2 Commando had a building. Each Commando had their own separate building that they used.
Was each Commando essentially a battalion?
4 rifle companies. 4 platoons, sorry.
4 platoons in each one of the Commandos?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was just like a very full company.
Absolutely. And we didn't refer to our OC as an OC. He was referred to as a CO.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. What did you know about, what was the role of the Airborne Regiment then?
Just as a quick reaction force for the government of Canada.
Wow. That's kind of neat.
It is.
Like, and that's your purpose of your unit?
And, you know, there's a couple of times put on standby to do certain things that you're realizing that, holy smokes, wow. And like even here, when I was here in 3 RCR as part of Mike Company, you know, there was a time when we were put on standby because we were the QRF for the armed forces to go to Central. We never deployed, but we did all the workup training and that with the JTF to possibly deploy at a moment's notice. Yeah.
Wow. So you get your posting message to 2 Commando.
3 Commando.
To 3 Commando because you're coming from 2 RCR.
Because I'm coming from the RCR, from the regiment as our Royal Canadian Regiment.
So now I'm understanding this. The RCR are basically the farm team for 3 Commando to fill its ranks.
That's right.
Interesting. So you have to go through a selection program?
So you get your posting message, and then when you get your posting message, there's the Airborne Indoctrination course.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed it that year. Just because I got posted, a bunch of us got posted way out of season. So I actually got posted here Thanksgiving weekend in '86. And so we missed the AIC that year. And so we just went about our normal business of being like, you know, a trooper in the commando. And then I ended up doing it the following year. Yeah.
Wow. So you show up to this regiment. What did you notice? Did you notice anything that was different other than the maroon beret and the shooting? Did you think the culture was different?
Culture was different.
Tell me about it.
Culture was different. People carried themselves a little bit differently. And
what do you mean?
Just a little taller. There was a little bit more pride in the uniform you were wearing, that kind of thing, because, hey, we had the smock, right? And then you go from the cherry wing to the white wing. So all those things kind of played into it. And then there was also, too, once you got to the field, there was that expectation that you be able to do the next thing up. So I can remember being on live fire exercise, you know, bebopping along like you did with the old C2, which was like the FN version that had like a 30-round mag as opposed to a 20-round mag, thinking, you know, my job is just, you know, wherever they tell me to go, that's what I do, open fire, cease fire, that's it. But I get called to the front. We're on this route march, and I get called to the front. I'm like, what am I getting called to the front for? And they go, get your map and compass out, you're leading. And in my head, I'm like, I just came from being a track driver in 2 RCR to now I'm expected to lead 100+ guys behind me through the woods at night. So there's also, and that leads into how you feel about yourself and how you carry yourself in your uniform as well, right? Because you know that you can do the job. And so that was a bit of a culture shock when it came, yeah. And you were kind of treated, not involved in a lot of stuff because you're the new guy. You got to prove yourself. I mean, it was definitely an environment where you had to prove yourself that you were able to hang out and do the job. It wasn't just hang out, it was doing the job. Because every time we did a refresher, I remember guys getting told that they couldn't jump because they couldn't do their 7 chin-ups. Like we would go through a refresher and then it's like, okay, call them the manifest, get up there and do your 7 chin-ups. You couldn't do them, you were gone. You weren't jumping. It was a good environment to work in. I'd go back and do it all over again. I really would.
It's interesting when people say that because you can see how much of a significant positive experience they had where like they would do it all over again.
Oh yeah, it made you grow up. Like I have a picture at home of me. I'm 22 years old in England holding an SAS or holding an SA-80 because I'm going on patrol with the SAS. Like that was cool. And to think that I was 22 years old and there was that amount of responsibility to go on a patrol with these guys for 10 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where were you?
So we were in England. We were up in Otterburn, which is up around Newcastle upon Tyne. And it was called Exercise TriStar. And so there was Belgians, Danes, Germans, Americans, French, all come together to do a patrol exercise. And we trained for real. They had dogs that would track us, which was scary because I'd never seen that here in Canada in any of the training that we had done. I mean, it's probably a common thing now, I would think, with, getting police to train their canines and that. But no, it was real. They gave us a demo. They said, if you don't stop after we tell you to stop the 3rd time, the dog is off the leash. And they gave a demo of this dog taking this guy down. One of the guys that was with another Brit patrol, John Duder, he actually had one on his boot. They were getting chased and he had to get away from that.
Wow.
Yeah. Or, and like when I say train for real, it was super foggy. And I'm like, this is going to be like back in Canada. The Chinook's not going to come to pick us up. Because the thing was, we were at a PZ and there was Belgians and Danes with us. And then my job as a 4th man of the SAS patrol was to help everybody get onto the helicopter. Because you have your rucks on and we were, like, say it was 10 days, so it was a lot of weight. And it's foggy, like very, very foggy. And I'm like, nobody's coming to pick us up. But you could hear the Chinook coming. And there's my patrol commander with his flashlight with the IR filter on. And then it's getting really loud and all of a sudden the fog clears and there's the nose of this helicopter, probably the distance of this room away from where we were.
Wow.
And it swung 180 and it put the ramp down. And then everybody's running. I go out, I'm helping everybody on. And the loadie grabbed me. And you know how short the ramp is on a Chinook? The helicopter's taking off. I'm staring at the hinge. And I'm trying to get myself upright to get into my seat. And I'm thinking, like, back in Canada, take your rucksack off. He's like, no, keep it on. Sit down, no seatbelt, and we're contour flying. And was like, wow, these guys train for real.
Wow, Greg, I'm glad you said that.
They train for real.
And I want to use the language very wisely here where I'm saying the Brits don't fuck around.
No, they don't.
They are very serious about their training. I'm so thankful because I got to deploy to England and I got a bit of exposure to their military and how they kind of do business. And I was impressed, especially when I met the Gurkhas. I'm like, we don't...
Selection just to get into.
Yeah. They're... Okay, let me backtrack. For anybody listening here who's never been exposed to their Gurkhas, yes, they are their own thing. They are their own element of interesting concept of soldiering to a degree that in Canada we haven't matched that. I'm telling you right now, if you're talking about the conventional military force, nothing in Canada has come close to my experience of observing the Gurkhas. But the nature of the British military, like I don't think they comprise on the whole risk thing like we do so easily. And I've noticed that as a difference. Like they're so about it that we would rather not train because of the idea that people could get injured.
Right.
With that risk consideration being taken by them. I'm blabbing right now, but Greg, tell me what you think.
No, and I agree. And, just watching some recent YouTube videos and that, I don't think they still have maintained that discipline that I would have been familiar with.
Yeah.
That I'm assuming, and I started to see it when I was getting out around 2005, that has been eroded.
Yeah.
Standing there, at attention during a show parade and dodging bed frame parts and stuff. I said it earlier, I would go back and do it all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because, like, Greg, when I look at my own service, and I'm going on 16 years, so I look back at it, I'm like, wow, I've noticed so much change in my time.
So you were getting in as I had just gotten out.
Oh, really?
So when did you get in?
I got in February 16, 2010.
Okay, so yeah, a little bit more than I keep forgetting it's now 2025. Yeah, forget it.
Yeah, time flies, huh? Yeah, but I do notice these cultural differences that have been happening, and some of these concepts are great, right? There's a degree of it that's really good for the military, right? Culturally speaking, we're human beings, and I think that's benefited us very well. And then there's some components of it that have come at a cost. Call it double-edged blades, if you will, where it has affected our capacity to be a very resilient fighting force. And I don't want to argue politics because that's not what we're about here, but I do want to say that we need to consider that there is benefit in a lot of ways to evolve as a organization when it comes to how we deal with our people, but we also have to very much consider the impact on it in our capacity to warfight.
Yes.
And I love, speaking of the British military again, there was an article I read while I was overseas last year, and they had a new CDS. And this new CDS, I won't bother with the resume, it was very interesting, but the CDS said in a quote statement where he's like, the way you measure an army is by its capacity to warfight. And I'm like, wow, that's language I'm not used to anymore. I got in 2010.
Nobody wants to use those words.
Yeah, I got in 2010, so I was in the army where it was wrong or weird if you weren't thinking about going to Afghanistan. Or like, why are you joining if you're not trying to go? This is the infantry. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about the reserves, right? Like the reserves, it was about going to Afghanistan. And so I think definitely in my time of service, I've seen so much cultural change. And it's interesting when you think about what came at the cost of it and how do we do something about it?
Yeah.
But
traditions are important. Traditions are important. I know that there's, some thought now of either like getting rid of RMC or eroding those traditions, and we can't erode those traditions. Like when I went to the mess dinner, those traditions, except you can get up and go to the washroom now.
Even that's new for me, man.
Well, and I was able to sit through the whole dinner without having to get up, but I wasn't pounding them back either. So, those traditions are important because they were earned at some point, right? So like the regimental toast, that goes back to World War II. I mean, colors. I mean, we have our colors for a reason because it's honor and tradition that's, for those that have fought before us, right? And so we need to keep those things going.
Yeah.
We can evolve, but we need to keep them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, our identity is wrapped into these traditions. Right? To remind us, like, we're the military, so we're not like the public service. So when you think about the toasts that we make, you think about at the dinner that we have the table for the fallen comrade.
Right.
And it's like a constant reminder of like, yo, don't forget what the fuck we get paid to do here.
That's right.
We're here to go to war. And when that day comes, when our government asks of us to go and do these things, go into hardship or into harm's way, for whatever reasons, it doesn't even fucking matter. But when that day comes, it's like, we need to be ready to execute. Because if we're not, man, a lot of people are going to pay for it. And we're going to be reminded the hard way.
Yeah. And I credit some of the resiliency that I have experienced, like through my career, to that hardship in training.
Yeah.
Like, in Srebrenica, when I was there and they were dropping bombs on us, I mean, I had my sergeant from my basic training, Hans Donnelly. He was in the back of my head yelling at me to get down because I used to throw T-flashes and RD Sims basically at you and yelling at you to get down. But in that moment, there was his face yelling at me to get down. and, the hardship of, the 6A and just some of the things experienced with that. That was a hardship, but I was able to deal with it because it was a hardship, able to deal with hardship, able to think around and try and come up with creative solutions for different things, and how to maybe compartmentalize a little bit to separate this from that because I need to do C, right? Separate A from B because I need to do C.
Yeah, and that's so important. So important in a job where there's chaos involved.
Yeah.
In what you're expected to perform in chaos. So compartmentalizing to focus on what needs to be done now.
That's right. And a lot of what we do in the infantry, what we do, I don't do it anymore. I haven't done it in 20 plus years. A lot of that's done in the infantry always comes with a checklist, right? So how many steps of battle procedure are there now? Because it was 21 when I was.
It was like 16, yeah.
Right. So it's 20. There's a checklist. Your orders, that's a checklist. Your phases within your orders, that's a checklist, right? So everything has a checklist, but you have to be able to focus and prioritize what you're going to do within those. Fire plan, like, my God, when I was in Waterman, checklist, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, Greg, let's go back a bit because, you just brought up an interesting example. And how do you say this place's name again?
Srebrenica.
Srebrenica?
Yeah.
Srebrenica. I want to get into your experiences over there. Can you tell us, was it your time in the Airborne Regiment where you saw your first deployment? Where did you see your first deployment?
No, my first deployment was when I was in 1 RCR. So that would have been because I left the Airborne Regiment in 1992. I got posted to 1 RCR. They closed London. 1 RCR moved up here into Y101, brand new building. And not really following what was going on in the news, but that summer I got posted into Charles Company, and then within the month I'm now bumped over to Bravo Company because I was track qualified and I was machine gun qualified. And we were a 4th Rifle Company attached to 2 RCR for the deployment to Bosnia. My understanding is Barbara McDougall, who was in Foreign Affairs at the time, had said Canada could commit another battle group, which Canada we put together at a moment's notice. And so I got posted, say, August timeframe to 1 RCR, and by Halloween, we were in Bosnia.
Wow.
So we went down to Gagetown to do workup training, and then come back, get all our affairs in order here, and then went back down to do some final training, and then deploy from Gagetown itself.
Okay. And so what did you understand about Bosnia at the time?
Knew nothing about it, really. Really knew nothing about it. I learned...
With anybody?
No, I don't think so. And really... news, I mean, CNN was around in that, but really not paying attention to what was happening in the world. Mind you, there wasn't the social media influence in that either at that time, right? Because we're talking 1992. And...
I was born that year.
So was my oldest. I left for Bosnia when my oldest was 6 months old. Yeah. And so really didn't know. I did myself better, though, because on my 2 later tours there, I read a little bit before I actually went overseas. So I knew a lot more on the last 2 tours. But yeah, really didn't know. And like, what are we going to do? I mean, we get off the plane in the middle of the night. We're driving in buses. We get to this camp. It wasn't really a camp. It was no granary. So farmers would bring their grain to this station where, not station, but like a silo and all that. That was right beside a railroad track. And so we set up basically in the parking lot. That's where our camp was set up. And there was really no job for us to do because the Patricias had the battle group at the time there, and they were patrolling that area of Croatia. So there was really nothing for us to do. We were running track courses, comms courses, and a couple other things. And then they finally got a job for us. We packed up, and because we were like Bedouins, we moved all over. Like we moved several different times within that sector itself. We even set up once, our platoon set up a temporary refugee camp for Muslims in a Serb-held area of Croatia. Like that's how messed up it was.
Can for all the people that may be listening that grew up in a generation that wasn't really informed about Bosnia, what could you explain to us to make us understand the situation of what's happening here in Bosnia?
So it started, Tito was an autocrat who really kept Yugoslavia together. There's three factions there. There was basically the Serbs, Croatians, and Muslims, or Bosnians as they refer to themselves. And so that started to that union, or how that country was held together, started to disintegrate after Tito died. And then so you had guys like Slobodan Milosevic, who was, a lot of Serb rhetoric, and it really caused a large divide. And then the country actually broke down. Slovenia broke away without a shot fired. And then Croatia wanted to separate, and then Bosnia was the center of the country was a mix of those three cultures. And so when we're, driving around in the daytime now, talk about like no exposure to anything, you'd be driving along and then there's 3-4 houses that are okay. And then you run across a string or 2 or 3 that are all shot up, spray painted with graffiti, maybe burnt out, that kind of thing. So it was really a big culture shock as to, wow, what the hell is happening here, right? And then even to the point of going to the dump. There was this kid, Praninsky, the CQ's driver, named him Elvis. And so Elvis and his family were living in the dump. I have no idea what ethnicity they were, just I know that they wouldn't have been Croat because they wouldn't have been living in the dump.
Why do you say that?
Well, because Croatians would have had housing, right? So everyone else on the fringes of society that was either Serb or Bosnian, they were just literally cast aside. The divide was that if you and I were before the war getting along, that now the war's happening, you and I wouldn't get along. It really happened kind of overnight. And so I can remember going to the dump and throwing our garbage off the trucks and people ripping open bags of garbage to eat what we had thrown out.
What was that like for you to see that?
Horrible. Like, how can you have you have houses right there and then somebody living and hoping to get something out of the garbage that you're tossing off, right? And it's just unreal. Yeah. And then that even carried on into my second tour where, I remember I was like second patrol out or something. Comes over the radio that shots are being fired near the front gate of the camp. So pull up, and it was red clay tiles snapping in a fire. Where we were in this area of Drvar, it was Croatians had it, and basically when the Dayton Peace Accord was being signed, they told all the warring factions that if you want to do anything, make sure you do it before this date, because this is when this is going to come into effect and you can't do anything anymore. And so the Croats made a big push, and so they pushed into the area of Drvar. And Drvar for one RCR was a real trouble spot. One RCR had to deal with riots where school vehicles were burned. There was a huge thing that happened downtown that made some international news at the time. And because this would have been 98. And so I pull up, and there's this person trying to put out this fire at his house with a garden hose. There's all these people standing around. The gentleman that was trying to put the fire out was his house from before the war. And he was moving back, and somebody in the local area had started his house on fire. And what this Croats had done is they had moved Croatian refugees into empty houses. So I can remember the first patrol out knocked over a fence post in this guy's front yard. And, going up, knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, what do we owe you for the fence post?" He goes, "I don't care. It's not my house. I'm leaving here in the next little while."
Whoa.
Yeah. And so this poor man, he just gave up. I remember saying to the cop standing beside me, like with the interpreter, I said, "Do you guys not get the fire truck up here?" He goes, "No, the fire truck's broken. It's not working." I'm like, "I just saw the fire truck driving around the factory down there." They're like, "No, broken." And so this house just went up in smoke with all these people standing around watching this poor guy trying to put out his house, trying to put out the fire. Yeah. We had an interpreter with us in Dravar where she wouldn't go up. We called the route Dead Cow because one RCR had found a dead cow in one of the garages. So we called it the Dead Cow route. She wouldn't go up there because there was Croatian refugees living in the house that she had to vacate. Yeah.
Do you remember like how this was making you feel when you start to like experience all these varying experiences of instances of this weird ethnic tension that's playing out on humanity?
I think after a while, I don't want to say that it becomes normal, but it becomes normal because it is normal for that. But
this is what the operating area is like.
This is what your area of operations is like.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so it's it plays on you because you have to play both sides of the game, right? Because you have to interact with those people that are imposing this on others. Like in Srebrenica, when I would go out to meet a convoy in town, merhaba was how you said hello to people, which was the Bosnian greeting. But when you went out to meet the convoy where the Serbs were, it was Dobar dan. So I can remember Walter Postman and I, going out to, because it would just be the two of us in an M113, because there's only 7 of us in Srebrenica until hotel company arrived. The whole time driving out there, I'm going Dobar dan, making sure that when I got out there,
You don't fuck this up.
that I don't screw this up,
Yeah.
right? Because we had no interpreters
Yeah.
there at this time, right? So in 92, 93, we had no interpreters at all.
That's right. If something popped off, who's going to de-escalate?
Right. And it was under the days of the UN where, no mag on, weapon over the shoulder, the old school flak vest with the 2 magazines stuff jammed into that those front pockets that you couldn't get them out of.
Could you tell me what you thought about that gear back then?
Well, to actually have a flak jacket was something unto itself because up until that point, I will say the gear you guys have now is hands down 100% better than what I had when I was getting out in 2005. Because we were just like starting with, we still had that old school vest, but at least we had the load bearing vest on top of it.
Right. The webbing?
No, the load bearing vest when I was getting out.
Okay.
It had the pockets. There was a big pocket in the back at the bottom and a big one at the top. I mean, at least that was something to carry gear. Whereas when I got in, for a lot of what you did, actually, when we would go to live fire ranges, it was like Vietnam era flak jackets that we would wear for live fire ranges. So,
Man, I wore that on my DP1.
probably wouldn't stop a whole lot, but that's what we wore. And so that actually was a sense of protection. It really was.
Yeah, okay.
Right. And then we deployed for that tour, the 92, 93, we deployed with the old steel helmet. We didn't get
steel helmet.
We didn't get the first generation of the newer helmets until
Like Kevlar?
Yeah, like I didn't get, we missed, because we were in Srebrenica, like that was a 43-day odyssey. We missed the initial issue of those helmets. And so I had the new helmet for less than a month before coming back home on that first tour.
Steel helmet, eh?
Yep, steel helmet, yep.
Tell me what that's like. Because you went from that to the first gen to like
all my jumps were with the steel helmet. So like my 96 jumps, how many concussions do I have I had, right? No, it was nice. Yeah. Just the fact that it was lighter. I think guys used to drop it on the top of it to see if they could create a soft spot.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it was something to see the actual kit evolve. Like I remember when we first got the C7 when I was in the Airborne Regiment, this rifle's never going to last. It's going to fall apart.
Wow, really?
It didn't. It survived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. I remember the FN used to have the forestocks, the wood blow off, the wooden forestocks blow off sometimes on landing, right? There's a small crack in the wood or something. So
that's so interesting. And it's like you had a wooden weapon system, now you went to like what, plastic?
Yeah, so like to see the C7, it was like, this thing's a toy. And then just a difference in firing them. Like you would go to we used to do called the Shoot to Live program. And so you would spend a week at the ranges. And, you'd end up with that shooter's cheek from the old FN.
Interesting.
Tight enough, you would get, you come off the range with a little bit of a swollen cheek.
Greg, there's so much I want to talk to you about, man. There's so much stuff, but I don't want to get too far off the path because like your time in Srebrenica,
yeah.
Srebrenica,
Yeah.
is so significant because I don't know anything really about it other than listening to your podcast before, right? Like the generational understanding from my generation to yours about your service over there, I really want to talk about as much as we can for all your memories you can remember from those experiences.
And that goes back to the mess dinner where I forget who was sitting beside me, goes, "What are those medals?" Because you guys don't see them very often, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. So yes, this is deployment. You're seeing like this ethnic tension happening. You're with your company in this location?
No.
Who are you with?
7 of us.
Only 7?
So this started off as what was to be a convoy escort of aid into Srebrenica.
Okay.
That's all this was. This is what this started off as. And so what they did was they put together a platoon. It was our platoon, 6th Platoon, Bravo Company, and company headquarters. And so we trundle off. We had to really scrape and scrimp and try and get all of the ammunition, fuel, and rations that we were going to need because they said should only take 2 or 3 days, but pack for 7. Well, 41 days later was when I got back to the main camp. But anyways, so we head off and we went into Sarajevo, met our French escort, and they took us over to Zvornik was the town within Serbia. It's actually split by the Drina River. And we actually crossed into Serbia. So we left Bosnia and we crossed into Serbia. And then
what was that like?
It was okay. Like there was nothing really that up until that point that was really giving us a hard time.
Okay.
Couple of checkpoints on the way where, local commanders, holding things up because I really don't think command and control was a thing within any of the 3 armies at the time.
Right.
There was a lot of just decisions made on the ground. And then but once we got into Serbia, it was then the challenge to get back into Bosnia because now the Serbs aren't letting us cross back into Bosnia.
They're not letting you leave their own country?
They're not letting us leave.
Wow, okay.
And so it took... The mission was a bit of a clusterfuck from the get-go. Going back to us trying to get enough fuel, trying to get enough rations to make sure that we're going to be able to complete the mission, right? And then I found out later on that communication on the ground from us through up to the main central command in Croatia and Bosnia itself was a gong show. And so we made multiple attempts to get back in, even with General Morion of France, leading us, a bit of a rogue, but trying to lead us to get us in. And then eventually they said, yes, 1 armored vehicle can go and go with some trucks. And that was Chris Sharon, Gord Morrison, I can't remember the other guys, a couple of the other guys' names, Tim Perel. They actually got in. And then they were doing some stuff there. And then General Morion declared the area safe haven, and that changed the dynamic again. And then they were doing a casualty evacuation on a sports field. And the Serbs lobbed a 120 millimeter rocket at the sports field, and 2 guys got hurt, Tim Perel and Donnie Paris. And it was then that they said that we could do another vehicle could go in. So then once that vehicle went in, Gord left, of course, Tim and Donnie left, Chris Sharon stayed, and then I can't remember his private, I can't remember his name. He left. So that left 7 of us on the ground there with all the unmos that happened to be there as well. And there would be anywhere from 12 to 15 of us in the PTT or the Postal and Telegraph building that we use as our headquarters for the duration of the time.
You said UNMO?
United Nations Military Observer.
Okay, that was just the name he has.
And then there was an ABC News reporter, Tony Bertley, that was there as well. him and a cameraman.
He had a reporter?
There was a 30,000 Deutschmark bounty on his head.
What?
At the time. Yeah.
What?
He was, videos were getting smuggled out. And this place was, when you drove into Srebrenica, there was a sign in English that said, "Welcome to the world's largest death camp." And so when you drove in, you just smelled rotten everything. It had this odor to it. And even when we came back to our main camp, even after throwing clothes into the washer, because we had like one change of clothes with us, right? Because we were only supposed to be gone 7 days. Everything just stunk.
Did your mission get extended to that 41 days you said?
Yeah, so it was 41 days from the time we left camp to the time we actually got back to camp.
Is it because you got held up in Serbia?
That was part of it, but the main thing why it lasted so long was once we got into Srebrenica, it was a commitment. And then there was talk in the background of trying to get a rifle company to come in and relieve us. And it took quite a while because it was on again, off again, as to whether the Serbs were going to let this happen, because the Serbs were the ones that were surrounding us. And then they finally allowed a hotel company to RCR to come in and relieve us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Man, that you're talking about the washing your uniform and the smell. Like, tell me about that.
One smell that sticks is a smell of burning garbage, because people were burning anything and everything they could for heat. We had a vehicle we had a 113 that was leaking diesel, and people would put little soup cans underneath it to collect that diesel so that they could light it somehow to create light. Because you got to remember, this is a place where there's no running water, there's no electricity. Aid is at a minimum because the Serbs are actually controlling the aid that comes in and when it comes in and how much comes in. Like I remember Gord, God rest his soul, taking me over to the hospital to show me, like, if somebody gets hurt, this is where you bring them. And there was a soldier laying on the table getting shrapnel taken out of his ass with no anesthetic. Like, he was just laying there screaming. Like, they were closing wounds by burning sulfur.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was the local treatment?
That was the local treatment. And if they felt the local doctor there, because there was only one doctor until Doctors Without Borders arrived, and they arrived just before us. But if you, like, for example, the reporter got hurt. They were out filming some stuff, and they figure 60 millimeter mortars that were fired on them. Had he been a local, they would have taken his leg off. But we were able to smuggle him out and get his wounds treated. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, like, totally overwhelmed. And how do you deal with stuff is the first time that the Serbs were letting the UNHCR trucks get filled with refugees, complete chaos and pandemonium down at the school. The school was a known refugee center. And, you would start off at a certain point. We started off at a certain point trying to control the crowd, but the crowd just kept pushing and pushing and pushing till you're now backed up against the trucks. And you're just passing people over your head onto the trucks. Like, I remember passing old ladies up onto the truck. And then,
wow, where were you guys going?
We were just down there to try and control the crowd, right? With the local soldiers and that. And we couldn't. I mean, it was impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And
can you tell me what that's like? Like, was there like a company, a platoon of you guys? And
7 of us.
There's 7 of you guys here at this checkpoint. And there's like, what, like hundreds?
Oh, hundreds.
Hundreds of people?
This was, I heard these numbers, that it had a pre-war population of 3,000, and at one point there were supposed to be 30,000 people in there. And walking back to the building, there was this lady who kept trying to pass me her infant. And, not knowing how to deal with this, I just turned around and I unloaded on her with a string of it, dropping probably a ton of F-bombs and everything. In English, and she's not understanding me, I'm not understanding her, but just totally overwhelmed with that situation. Like, what do you do? There's nothing I can do. There's 7 of us, and how am I supposed to help you?
Yeah.
Right?
But I guess in their desperate eyes, they
Absolutely
think giving it to you is worth the roll of the dice.
Absolutely.
And it's so crazy. Like, I can't even imagine myself being in that kind of position. I've been on 4 operations, 3 overseas, 1 domestic, and it's hard for me to imagine that happening in Canada. Someone trying to hand me their child, and then thinking it's a good idea. Like, I don't know you, and like you don't know us.
In this crowd, there was people passing their children to people in the trucks.
Yeah,
and I can remember the one day there was this kid. He was like 13, 14 maybe, and the Serbs had a thing that no males of fighting age were allowed to be on the trucks, just women only. And I can remember actually one day there was that rule, and we were going out, and there was a little spot. I don't know why these people still stayed in their houses, but they did. They dragged a board of anti-tank mines across the road to stop us, and they only came out on the south side of their house, because if they went out on the north side of the house, they get shot at. And what they did was they stopped the trucks so that they could get more people on. And this one day, in and around that same area, we were the Serbs were kicking males off the trucks. And there was an elderly man who could barely walk that they made get off the truck, that we had to be impartial and not help.
What's that like being in that position, man?
Fuming and boiling inside. Like, it's yeah. Like to treat another human being like that, I don't know what it takes to get to that level. And like the 12-year-old boy I was talking about, 12 or 14-year-old boy, he got himself all done up in a scarf and everything. And I remember the one day we were up there and we're making sure that there's no males on the trucks and that. And I seen him. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, he's like, so I don't know if he made it through or not, but hopefully he did. But yeah.
So many of us live our lives and we have like no idea how people can live in such extreme type of circumstances where life and the value of life is so different. In another part of the world, like we take that for granted so much. And, and with that being its own kind of important idea to want to unpack and talk about, but the other idea is that we send people from our society, our civilization, or what we consider our normal to other places, and they experience that kind of stuff. And, I can only imagine how difficult that is to endure it while you're presently there, let alone to just, coming back home into like this place that used to be your normal. But I don't know if it feels normal. Does it feel normal for you to come home from a theater like that? Is it easy for you to come home? Was it?
The coming home actually started after we got back to the main camp. So to add a little bit more to the story from Srebrenica, there was an event that ended up being called, you can look it up on Wikipedia, YouTube, whatever. It's called the Srebrenica Children's Massacre. Happened April 13th, 1993. So it was Easter Monday that year. So we had been out returning some stuff and getting some water, Walter and I, and we were in a GMC Suburban, armor-plated with bulletproof glass. This was with the UNMO's vehicle. And we were using Motorola radios, which are line of sight, and we'd been in this one spot for a while, and it's like, we should probably get back because we haven't heard anything in a while. And so as we're coming back, because the town was being shelled, and it's like, wow, those sound a lot closer than they have in the past. Because you talk about steel helmets. We used to sleep with our heads in our steel helmets and our black jackets on. And the joke was with us when we heard when they would shell the town at night would be, is that incoming or outgoing? And I was like, depends on what end of it you're on. So the town's getting shelled like pretty hard. And so we're like, we should head back. So we head back, and then through the downtown, people are under doorways and all like protecting themselves. And we roll up on the intersection where the road comes out from the school. Like I say, the school is a known refugee center. And there were 9 dead adults, and I don't know how many dead kids in the intersection. And then down in the schoolyard where they would have like little concrete soccer pitches and stuff and whatnot, there were a whole bunch more dead down there. So we get on the radio to the UNMO in charge, Major Jamie from New Zealand, And he says, are there any wounded? And we're like, yes. And he says, load them up. And so Walter and I get out. And so I'm getting out the passenger side, and then just there's a sidewalk and then an embankment. And as Walter's gone around to the back, 3 more mortar rounds land, but they're up on the hill. But it was enough to rock that vehicle from side to side,
Wow.
leaving 2 wheels on each side. I almost felt like I was going to get sucked through the vehicle from the concussion. Walter actually got knocked on his ass and trying to throw this lady into the back. And then I go around to the driver's side, and there's this old man sitting behind the steering wheel, and I hauled him out. And then there were 2 or 3 other people in the front of the vehicle with me. And the lady that was sitting beside me, she was missing a portion of her lower jaw.
Wow.
So she's bleeding inside the truck. So we barreled it down. We unloaded, and then we went back. And then Lieutenant Mikatuk and Chris Sharon came up with an M113, and they made the mistake of dropping the ramp. And people just started throwing bodies onto the ramp. Just throwing bodies on. And as they were driving back down to the hospital, where there was 2 piles dead and wounded, the cable broke. And so we had to lift the ramp up afterwards. But later on that day, it took pretty much all afternoon to clean the blood off the ramp of that. Yeah. And yes, it was over 60, close to 60 people killed that day and over 100 wounded. And so that's when they really started pushing to try and get hotel company come in. And then we do our thing. Hotel company comes in, and then so like for us,
Greg, can we just back this up a little bit? We'll get into the hotel company arriving. But wow, is this your first time witnessing a mass? To call this a mass casualty situation is probably not the right way to describe this. This is ethnic cleansing. This
well, they knew what they were doing.
A mass killing.
They would have had to have had observers up in the hills around the town, because the one day they hit our building. So Chris and I are
your UN position,
UN building.
Yeah.
We had UN painted on all 4 sides, UN vehicles out front, and UN painted on the roof. And so we're laying in bed trying to get some sleep because we'd been on security through the night, and hear some Browns land, and it's like, wow, fairly close. And then Mike Jeffers comes in, and he's like, hey, the platoon commander wants everyone in the bunker now. And one of us says, why? How close was that? And just then this round lands, probably about here to the wall away from the building, that literally rocked the building. Mike went flat on the floor, gets up and goes, how's that for fucking close? And he was gone. So there I am in the bunker trying to lace up my boots, and I can't because my hands are shaking that bad.
Wow, adrenaline?
Yeah, adrenaline. Just I just couldn't, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so they knew what they were doing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, when you you show up to something like that, you see dead children, you see women, men, do you even remember what was going on in your head? What you were thinking when you saw that for the first time?
No, one guy stands out. He was laying on his stomach, but it looked like he was laying on his back because of the way his arms were folded in front of him, and his head was off to the side and his eyes were open, and he was the color of paraffin.
What's that?
Like paraffin wax. Like that yellowy color, that yellow waxy color. Like he was dead from the concussion. Not a drop out of him, blood out of him, just from the concussion. Yeah.
Wow.
And what's funny is I had the key to our storage, where we kept all our extra rations and that, because while we were there in Srebrenica, so we were on 2 ration packs a day because we didn't know when we would get resupplied. So we were just 2 ration packs a day, whether it was American, whether it was Canadian, whether it was German, whatever. It was 2. I had the key to a few bottles of booze, but never thought to go get it, thank God. But yeah, I went up onto the roof of the building to try and decompress and process what was happening. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot for a human being to absorb.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And totally not prepared for it because this is something that we weren't told to expect. Right?
It's crazy, man. So what what was the word on the street in the battalion or like in the company? Like, what were people talking about it? Were people like, did you guys, like, were they having discussions about like, hey, you guys are going to see some shit out there?
Nobody knew what we were doing. Nobody knew. Even to the point of back in Y101, them not wanting to tell anyone what we were doing. Louis Gentile, UNHCR worker, after the events, like the Monday, he's like, hey, give me your phone numbers. I'm going to contact your family members and let them know that you're okay. So we did. Great. He didn't take into account time change.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, Sherry, gets a phone call at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And first words out of this guy's mouth are like, Greg is okay. Okay, what? And so the next day they were having a spouses meeting up at 1 RCR, and rear party wouldn't acknowledge that we were even in Srebrenica. Because this is also the time, too, where you got like 1 5-minute phone call a month, if that, right? And the last contact Sherry had from me from a civilian phone was that, yeah, we should be heading back to our main camp tomorrow. Nothing's happening here. So I'll call you when I get back there.
Yeah.
And then this is like 2 or 3 weeks later that she's getting a phone call from this UNHCR worker. Their rear party here is not acknowledging where we actually are.
That is so interesting. Like, just the differences in terms of like your missions back then and our missions and how they're done today.
Yeah.
You know, every operation I've done overseas, I've been able to communicate on my cell phone back home with my loved ones with really like no real hard limitation capacity. Like,
No, and
it's so easy now.
And the public knowing what you guys are doing.
And the public
for the most part.
Yeah,
But
for the most part.
Nobody knew what we were doing then, right? Nobody knew at all.
And even your capacity to communicate back home with your loved ones was so limited.
Yeah.
You're talking like once a month. Man, my girlfriend would not like that. I'll tell you this right now.
I did keep a journal while I was in Shrub. I kept a journal for that tour.
Wow.
I smuggled a bottle of Slivovica, and it broke and in my bag, and the ink that I had used ran. But when I was in Srebrenica, I had some pages left in a field message pad, and I had a pencil, and so I kept notes in that.
You used to document your experiences.
Yeah, it's just like a couple of sentences a day, yeah.
Wow.
Still. Yeah.
And there are some legible like or readable parts of it.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That is so interesting. These are your like war diary notes from
Yeah, I'd actually like to see what, it's not called war diary anymore. It's, I forget what they're called, but you can apply to the government through access to information, I guess, to get them.
Yeah, that's neat.
You know,
That's neat.
it's been, close to over 30 years anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of that sure like belong in our museum or something, you know?
Well, I did send Georgina, is that how you say Georgina?
Yeah, Georgiana?
Yeah, I did send her pictures, and I did left electronic copies of my pictures from that tour here at the museum.
Wow.
Museum here.
That's incredible. This is amazing right now. Like,
And then we leave.
yeah.
Hotel company comes in and relieves us. I actually got jacked up by the CO of 2 RCR.
What happened?
Himself on the radio. So you couldn't wear the steel helmet and the old headset. You just couldn't do it. So I had my beret because Mass Corporal and above wore the beret. And then we made sure Chris had his ball cap on, forward facing the way that it should be. And this voice comes over the radio, whatever call sign, blah, blah, blah. This is Niner. Where's your helmets? So I come back and, blah, blah, blah.
Well, are they like looking at you right now?
So he saw me drive by somewhere in town, and I get on the radio and I'm like, we don't have the new helmet. My battle group has the new helmet. So he sought out our platoon commander and jacked him, and then Lieutenant Mick was like, no, we don't have the new helmet. This is my helmet. So yeah, I've been actually jacked by a commanding officer.
Wow.
Radio, personally.
That's awesome. We like to ask guests if they have a good jacking story, and people usually don't or don't want to share for some reason, but that's awesome.
I've been jacked a few times, yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's character building for those of us.
So then we get back to camp, and then it was like I was like, people were told to leave us alone, talk about it, and yeah, and just like I remember
Not talk about it, eh?
Yeah, like I remember coming back, and the first supper I had, I couldn't finish the plate of food because it was too much for me at the time, and like sitting and eating supper by myself.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and they had the camp had an OP that was manned at night on the hill, and it was an old brick factory, so they had moved everybody into the kilns for protection.
What's that?
Kilns, like where they make bricks, like it's a heat, like they fire the bricks in the kiln. And they had one round land outside the camp. And it's like, they moved everybody in, and like we were laughing. One round, that's nothing. Because we were like thinking we were rock stars at that point in time, because
You're getting shelled all the time?
Shelled on a daily basis, yeah,
wow.
while we were there, yeah.
Greg, can I ask you about that? What's it like? What do you remember that feeling of being shelled? Because I've never had to go through that.
When you're at ground zero, like it doesn't whistle.
What do you mean when you're at ground zero?
Like when they're landing in and amongst you, there's no whistle. There's just that loud crump. Like when we were at the intersection with the school and those were going off up on the hill, like about 10 meters away, there was no whistle. No, the whistle's when it's going overhead.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the majority of glass, like we gun taped the windows, the majority of glass is going to go out. Because if you think of the concussion wave, it pushes the glass in so far, but then it's sucking it back twice the distance. So the glass is going to go out.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so neat.
And when they shell the hospital across the road from you, the concussion will blow out the fire that you're sitting around.
Wow.
Because it knocks the ashes and everything everywhere. Yeah.
So when you went over there, did you serve in a mortar platoon capacity?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So in this position that you're in, like, what did you understand your mission to be?
Escorting aid.
Escorting aid?
That was pretty much it, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then how long was this deployment?
About 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So then when you finish this deployment, where do you go? Like, what happens? Do you go back to Petawawa? Like, where are you going?
Yeah. So the 7 of us were bumped up to be on the first flight home.
Okay.
So we were, on the first ones home, and we flew into Fredericton. And then from there, we came back to Petawawa. And I want to say treatment wasn't great then, because we had just been away for 6 months, and we were still getting taskings for the summer. Right? So guys haven't been away for 6 months, come home, get 2 weeks leave.
Wow. Okay.
And then get sent on a summer tasking. I was lucky. My summer tasking was here in Petawawa with the Army cadets down on the Mattawa Plains.
Interesting. Did you guys have the HLTA? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Home leave travel assistance, I believe.
Yep. Yeah. So Sherry came to Germany, flew into Vienna, and then we did Vienna. We did Austria, a little bit of Austria and Germany together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then you just deployed right back?
Right back.
So what was it like for you to go on HLTA, seeing the shit you've seen? Did you tell her anything?
No.
You didn't tell her anything?
No. Like the dump and the houses and that was all prior to the HLTA. Srebrenica was after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did she ask about it?
Don't recall her asking. No.
Okay.
No. I know that she probably heard stuff for the very first time when I went to give a speech at my hometown Legion Remembrance Day.
When is this?
Oh, God, kids were still really small. So it was before my last deployment anyways. So I still would have been serving.
Okay.
But I was invited by my hometown Legion to come and at their Remembrance Day dinner, be the guest speaker. And I'm like, what am I going to tell these World War II vets and stuff? Right? And so I just started talking. And Sherry had said that there was stuff in there that she had never heard before. It's just because I didn't think that there was a need for her to hear it. I would have told those stories in and amongst the guys just because that's what we do. Army guys, grab your helmets. I got a story, right? And so, yeah, and it wouldn't have been something that would have been talked about at home at all. And there was no real, I think you guys coming home from Afghanistan, went to Mirage for a couple of days and then come back to Canada after that. There was none of that. It was just like back into Canada and off you go.
Yeah, like...
Because I think it was still the Cyprus mentality, right? So.
Can you explain that to me, the Cyprus mentality?
Oh, Cyprus was a 6-month vacation. I never made it there personally, but I heard that all you did was you went to Ayia Napa, you went to Nicosia, you did your patrolling, come home for leave, and then come home when it's done. That was my understanding of it.
You're saying places that like ring out to me because I was just there. My last trip right now, where I was deployed with Op Globe, we were staged in the event that a non-command evacuation was going to be ordered in that region of the Eastern Mediterranean for Lebanon. So, but yeah, Ayia Napa, I lived there, and it's just the poor man's Ibiza is what people may say or whatever. But yeah, like
I left 2 RCR and then 2 RCR went to Cyprus. And when I was leaving, and then when I was getting posted to 3 RCR, like they were getting ready to go. And then when I came to 3 Commando, they had just gotten back.
Interesting.
So I was out of luck to get to say.
What was so fascinating to me was when I was over there, I was there for Remembrance Day. And so I volunteered my section. We had one section of 3 RCR para company guys for this force protection gig that we had. And when we were at this Remembrance Day ceremony at Wolsey Barracks in Cyprus, there was a bunch of commando veterans that were there for the 1974 anniversary. That was so interesting to me. I had no clue those people were going to be there. No clue about this anniversary, the significance of anything. I just knew that Remembrance Day is happening in Wolsey Barracks, and I know that Wolsey Barracks has significance to the RCR. So I learned so much about our history there, and I learned a lot about the Airborne Regiment and their history, and how I argued that it is tied into the RCR history to some degree.
It is, because you would come from the RCR and you would go back to the RCR and you would take those experiences to the Airborne Regiment, and then you would take those experiences from the regiment back to the RCR.
Yeah.
Right? So it is intertwined. And yeah, because, as a professional soldier, when you're with one, that's who you're with. And when you're with the other, that's who you're with.
Yeah.
And we all started off as RCR Patricia Van Du at some point in time, right?
And then went over there and then came back. That's so interesting. Sometimes I wish like this organization still exists. I feel like they played such a significant role in the military.
Well, CSOR, I think, is what the Airborne Regiment would have evolved into.
Yeah, evolved into is a great way to put it. Yeah.
It would have evolved. Just like your roles and responsibilities here within the battalion, I know they've changed since my time. They would have changed in the Airborne Regiment as well. It would have evolved into what it is today. CSOR.
It's interesting. Do you miss the Airborne Regiment?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah. What was it like to go from there to the RCR, to go back?
I would say just because of jumping out of airplanes and the expectation to work at that next step up, camaraderie was a little bit more, I would think. But I mean, there's camaraderie in the RCR as well, right? So,
yeah.
And I mean, like the majority of the guys that I hang out with at the Upper Ottawa Valley Association here, there's only a handful that were ever in the Airborne Regiment. And when you're there, it doesn't matter anyways.
No.
Because you're just all RCR. Yeah, no. I would say I really like my 6 years in the Airborne Regiment, like 86 to 92. I really like that. Jumping was something that was, that good rush. 96 of them.
So what happened then? Like, when did this whole para company thing come to the 3RCR? Were you there for that?
I think when we stood up 3RCR, that para company was there because the thought was that all 3 regiments would be able to contribute to an airborne deployable unit.
Very interesting.
Yeah, because it goes back to, I think, the 1090 concept, where it was like 10% reg force, 90% reserve, that they would have within the brigades. Yeah.
I don't want to comment any further. I'm a very like opinionated person, and I need to like chill on the opinions because like I'm pretty sure there's policies governing this about me. Like I know there are, so I'm just gonna like tread softly and lightly here. But I'm very glad that I have a guest here who served in that regiment and that can speak to it. And I love the passion, and you can tell that there was something special about that unit when you see like this kind of.
We would say that we wouldn't get along. So like one commando, like all three of the commandos, like the infantry commandos, wouldn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody get in a fight downtown, it's not just one commando in that fight; it's everyone's involved in that fight.
Yeah.
The day when that would happen now, but no.
So where did your career go after that deployment? From I guess your first trip to Bosnia?
Yeah, so 96, I ended up in the Airborne Holding Unit, which was after the disbandment, which became the 1090 Battalion and 3 RCR. And then 2 deployments with 3 RCR, both in 98 and 2001, something like that. And then,
so just so I can understand the history of 3 RCR, it didn't exist until after
once
the
it
airport?
closed Germany.
Okay.
Once Germany was closed, it went to the 1090 Battalion. So it was there in name, just really wasn't manned the way that it is right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we still, L101 was where I was first in mortar platoon. That's where we hung out up there. And then these new buildings were all being built. So like this building was being built then.
Wow. So were you part of the first occupants of this building? What was that like? What did you guys think?
It was great. We actually got a chance to go over to 1 RCR and talk to the guys over there to see what they didn't like about their building so that we wouldn't have to live through that here.
Oh, interesting.
So this is a newer and improved version of Y101 with input from the ground up.
Do you remember what they didn't like over there?
In mortar platoon, it was really small stores area.
Okay.
Yeah, the stores area over in 1 RCR from mortar platoon was really small. I know because I worked in it. Yeah, everybody was kind of sitting on top of everyone over there. Like the group commanders, their desks were like, staring at each other. The platoon commander, platoon weren't shared a small office.
Yeah. Interesting. Alrighty. So then you get to the Airborne Holding Unit. What is that?
So that was the 1090 Battalion. And so we're just a smaller group of guys, and we were just hanging out really for what ended up being 3 RCR standing up.
So when you say Airborne Holding Unit, is this also to become parachute company, para company?
Para company, parachute company, I think was just kind of inherent when they were talking about standing up the battalion again anyways, again to go with that concept of having that airborne deployable organization that they could fulfill with, people from across the country.
Okay. And so when that stood up, did you have an opinion on that?
Nope.
No? Did you think it was like the right thing to do if you were going to close or disband that? And
no. I mean, still upset that the Airborne Regiment got disbanded.
Yeah.
I think it was a knee-jerk reaction.
So when it comes to like your military service, what happened with your career then? Like once you get back?
I thought, or we thought, that we were going to, mass corporal's net, get on the next small arms course, those kinds of things. Didn't happen at all. Even after what we had been through,
you were a master corporal when you were on this deployment?
Like being in real world, events, was thinking, geez, I should be on the next small arms course. That didn't happen for a number of years after that.
Why?
Don't know.
Competition?
I don't know. I spent 11 years as a mass corporal, so.
Yeah, I spent 9, so I'm up there with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on. Okay, so when did you deploy for your second mission?
98.
In 98.
That was to the town of Drvar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're going back to Bosnia.
Yep.
And you're going to a different AO.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about this experience.
So this was the area where the Croats had moved in and put Croatian refugees in the houses. I was lucky enough that my patrol area for there was, for the most part, outside of the town, and just really trying to bring because this was now NATO, bring that NATO presence out into the area, right? Also, we would, one of the things, because I was a mortarman, we would count their weapons monthly. We would go down to their cantonment site and we would count each rifle, each machine gun, each mortar tube, each bipod to make sure that it was matching up with the list that they had provided us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing now? Are you seeing a lot more of like regulations and like the order of law kind of being imposed? Or
yeah, but there was still cops abusing their power and whatnot. So like we had the ability to take weapons and badges from police.
Interesting.
Under NATO, like they could set up a roadblock for 30 minutes. So we
under NATO.
Yeah.
So this is a big difference.
This is a tour under NATO. My last 2 tours were under NATO. The first one was UN.
Okay.
Completely different set of rules.
Tell me about this.
So clear and defined rules of engagement, whereas under the United Nations, they change daily. And so it was a card, almost half of an 8.5 by 11, and it was front and back under the UN. And so it would be rule 1, option A, choice B. And it would be like, there was like 10 or 12 of them on there. And it would change frequently as to what we could do. Whereas under NATO, it was, this is what it is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you like the differences you were seeing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It was better for somebody. It was better and easier for somebody to make a decision because I know what that rule of engagement is, and it's not changing on me all the time. It's clear and it's defined. Like, so, you know, you drive.
Which is such an important thing to a soldier.
Yeah, because you don't want to hesitate because you're not sure if you're going to make the right decision or not.
Yeah.
Like the one time you see the cops, okay, I'll give them 30 minutes from now. And so, sorry, Craig. Yep. You see them, so give them 30 minutes from now, roll back up, and it's like, why are you guys still here? And they kind of like brush off, and it's like, no. 30 minutes. What's going on? And giving you a hard time, and it was just unfortunate. This time I didn't have an interpreter, but I had a guy in my section that was Polish.
Interesting. Okay.
So I guess it's like Polish and Serbo-Croat is like French and Cajun French. They could get their point across. And I had 2 juice monkeys in my section. And so there's me talking to this policeman like this, looking up at him and giving me a hard time. And all of a sudden I'm like, guns and badges on the hood of the car. And they're like, what? And then he went to step forward and say something. And then these 2 guys step forward and then they put their guns and badges on the hood of the car. I'm like, that's it. No more tonight. If I see you any more tonight, I will take those. And then you will have to explain it.
Mm.
You know?
That's interesting. How'd that make you feel?
Maybe a little bit of small man syndrome came out. But
No, but would you say that it made you feel good, like you can make a difference?
Yeah. I don't know if it did then, because like later on you're talking to a kid who's part of this cycle or this generational cycle of like the talk of, you know, they do this, they do that, as opposed to, you know, trying to get along, because there was still the real, you know, cultural divide there. But yeah, trying to make a difference for somebody that even just happens to be driving through the area.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. So tell me about like other experiences that you had in this kind of setting. Like, what was your mission this time? What did you understand it to be?
We were really there just supervising the military.
Okay.
We would go and observe their exercises. We would
like a more like a mentorship kind of thing?
Not really mentorship, but just observing them and making sure that they're following along with what was laid out in the Dayton Peace Accord.
Okay.
We even did a dog and pony for them to show them our stuff, to try and build some trust between them and us.
Interesting. Okay.
Because like we're going in and looking at all of their stuff. And so we even had the Brits come up with an AS-90. They removed all their top secret stuff, you know. But they rolled up with an AS-90. We set up all, you know, a stand for them to see all of what we had.
For anybody listening who doesn't know what an AS-90 is, could you explain that?
So it's the equivalent of the Canadian M109. It's a 155 millimeter self-propelled gun.
Okay, so basically an artillery piece on top of wheels.
Tracks.
Tracks.
Yeah, tracks.
Okay,
yeah.
right on.
Yeah, and we just started building some trust. And like the one far end of town, there was they had some tanks and that. I don't know how well they actually operated in that, but we would be heading out patrolling that way, and all of a sudden we're getting waves from them.
Okay.
So we started to build some sort of rapport. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
And so were you seeing anything like what you were seeing back in 92?
No,
No?
nothing to that extent, except for, the house burning and people standing around watching that man's house burn. Nothing really like that at all. Like I remember the Patricias taking over from the Patricias and going to this one town, and it's like, they don't like you here. They don't like you here, so I wouldn't bother coming back and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I took that as kind of a challenge. Like, why? And he really didn't have an answer. And, 3/4 of the way through the tour, starting to build relationships with the police and that, I get called to the CP one night around 6 o'clock saying I have to go out to the police station in this town to pick up some UXOs. I'm like, what, now? And they're like, yeah, they actually asked for you by name to come out and pick this stuff up.
That's so interesting.
I'm like, okay, so grab a couple other guys, we go out and pick it up and, put it in the UXO pit when we got back. But yeah.
Ask for you by name.
Yeah.
How'd that make you feel?
Making a difference with the cops then.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we did too on that tour was going around and identifying needs in the community, because there was a CIMIC. Don't ask me what it stands for.
Mm-hmm.
But we installed toilets in a school that I stumbled across the one day. And we would bring school supplies.
What do you mean you just stumbled across?
Just out in the patrol area and see these kids playing and stuff, and stop and say, hey, what's going on, and go out and kick a ball around with some kids and that. And this was a school that was really out in the middle of nowhere. And their toilets were your typical Muslim toilet with the foot pads and the ceramic and then the hole in the floor. And we actually installed functional toilets for them within the school itself.
Like seating toilets,
Yep.
like to sit on?
Yeah.
Wow. Was that like your idea?
Yeah, like we're like, how can we do this? So we got to the CIMIC guys, and actually the camp had a rock band. And the rock band played in a bar in Cazin, C-A-Z-I-N, raised money, and then we used that money and some of the civic money to put these toilets in.
Was that your idea?
The band?
Yeah.
No, someone in the platoon came up with the idea.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing, having like an impact in the community that you're operating in, and like.
Yeah, we had people, the place was packed apparently. Probably seeing what these Canadians can do, but it was packed.
Wow.
I raised some money. So yeah.
A very different vibe from your first trip.
Absolutely.
Very different.
Yeah.
When I first joined the military, when people spoke about Bosnia, they're talking about, I think, this time frame to 2001 or 2002, whenever the last rotation was. And that's what was my understanding of Bosnia. People even called it Bosnia, just talking about how they had such a positive experience there in that kind of way, a very chill experience. And then there was another group of people you would hear this in like the grapevines, because most of the people I interfaced with when I came into the military never served in Bosnia in the time frame of your first trip there. And, it was hard for me to really understand what was happening in that conflict that we were engaged with. But, there was a large period of time that we were there for. And depending on what period of time you were there, it was like very different.
Very different set of dynamics.
Very different set of dynamics. Yeah. So in terms of how the military can be for a young person and how you get educated in the military, storytelling is like a big part of it, in the mess, in the field, wherever you find yourself with your superiors or your peers, you hear stories. You hear stories about the guys who came before you, about their experiences overseas. And so my understanding of Bosnia was very much not understanding the ethnic cleansing that was happening, and the horrible humanitarian situation that existed.
When it went to NATO, when Bosnia went to NATO, the Canadian area responsibility was the area that was secured the fastest with the least amount of issues.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
How we treat people.
Canadians?
Yeah. So a friend of mine was on one of the early rotos in Afghanistan, and there was Americans coming to work with them, And they're like, thank God we're working with you guys today because nobody will shoot at us. Like, I know
I
Afghanistan.
used to hear that.
I know Afghanistan is different than Bosnia, but it's
Yeah.
really just how we treat people,
Yeah.
right?
That's so interesting. I used to hear that. I used to read about that in articles too. When I was a young person, like Afghanistan was the most relevant thing when it came to thinking about the military. So when I did like these, homework assignments on the military as a kid, I remember seeing articles that said that the Canadians were just a force that wasn't targeted as much as the Americans were. And if I remember correctly, it was how they conducted themselves in the AO, And that's so interesting to talk about in 98. It's the community work you did with some ideas from a couple of guys from the platoon. He had such a positive impact in your AO.
Yep.
That probably left a long-lasting appreciation for these foreign soldiers that are here in your country, that are here to help.
We were really involved with the community. Like, I used to, like, one of the communities that I went to, remember we were sitting at this community leader's step one night.
Yeah.
And we're just sitting around shooting the breeze. Call to prayer goes off in the mosque, and I'm like, man, that must be annoying hearing that, like, so many times a day and whatnot. He goes, after a while you don't even hear it. And he's like, have you ever been in one? I'm like, no, I have not. Would you like to? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go in, and we see the mosque, and we see how it's laid out very similar to a Christian church and whatnot, and just finding the similarities and then talking about the similarities and talking about the differences. Right, because there are going to be differences. And that's the same community where they were having call it a memorial for people in that local area that had died during the war. And so they were going to have a running race for money, like the first, second, third would win money. And there was a few other things that were happening. And he mentioned, I forget how it came about, but I mentioned ball hockey. And all of a sudden, I said it without getting any approval. I said that we would come out on that day and we would do a ball hockey demo. And then I got back and the platoon commander really didn't want to do it. And I'm like, I kind of committed us. And I said, think of the community relations it's building in this area. So he really hummed and hawed. He's actually MPP for Grey Bruce now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Can you say their name?
Alex Ruff.
Alex Ruff.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was our mortar platoon commander. And so we went out. I took a good bunch of guys out with us. Nobody wanted to wear the hockey equipment because it was hotter than hell that day. And roads are really narrow. We had people lined up on the sides of the roads, and they had a blast.
That's incredible.
Springtime. Yeah.
Wow. It's times like this where I'm super thankful to have come from, my legacy of like those who have come before me. To know that people like you existed and how you guys did your business while you guys are overseas, and people are just people at the end of the day. And there's a lot of good people with a very kind heart,
And like even before my time, the guys from the Van Dews and Mike Company from 3 RCR that did their time in Sarajevo, right? The public doesn't know about those guys either.
Yeah. And that's the amazing thing about this podcast is that I really want to do my best in what I think is community service by trying to connect us with the people that were there and to share their experiences, because I do love what I do and I love this organization, and there's something special about the community of it where I owe it to a lot of the people that have come before me who have helped make the identity of the regiment of what it is today. And I'm just trying to do my best to contribute a little bit until the next person.
Yeah, because like my time, I think it was General Hillier called it was a decade of darkness. In other words, the public didn't know what we were doing, right? I would say that the last big thing that the public knew about the military would have been the Oka crisis. And that was when I was back in the Airborne Regiment. So that's back in when was that? That was late 80s anyways.
Were you involved in that?
No, here we didn't even start to do any training for it here because that was a 5 Brigade thing between 2 RCR and the Van Dews.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's so much history. Like,
there is
so many things to talk about.
And there's a lot of times too that you don't know who has done what.
Mm-hmm.
And or like who's a vet and who's not. Right? Like in my second career, as a nurse, there were 2 sergeants wearing RCR cap badges. One night when I was working, because I'm a nurse at the hospital here in town, and I worked emerge, and they were shooting their mouths off. One of them broke his ankle. He got into a fight in the Giant Tiger parking lot, and they were shooting their mouths off, and they're still in their DU at 11 o'clock at night on Remembrance Day. And I'm just like, I'm seething inside. I'm just seething. And my shift was over, and I went up to the door and I said, I just want to let you guys know that I retired same rank as both you guys. And I said, I served in all 3 battalions, and the way that you guys are behaving right now absolutely disgusts me, how you're presenting yourself to the public. And I walked away. And apparently they got very quiet the rest of the night while they were there. So you never know who you're going to run into.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I for me, this connecting with my past, if you want to call it that, has really just started, I want to say, within the last couple of years.
Why?
I don't know. Age, maybe. I don't know. Reliving my past.
Interesting.
You know? So.
Interesting. Yeah. Have you been thinking about your service a lot more?
Yeah. It's impact in the impact that it's had, say, on family life without knowing what was going on at certain points in time, though getting into too much stuff.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because it's obviously had to have had an impact somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? Because there was no, like, the help that's out there now with somebody getting out is absolutely 110% better than what it was when I was getting out.
Did you guys have like a transition center back then? No. Yeah, that exists now. It's pretty big.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I had my release medical and no questions about any mental health or anything like that. It was just like, see you later. So I went from the Army one day and 2 weeks later into school.
Back then, like, did you see people who were impacted negatively by what happened overseas?
So, yeah, like even the methloquine thing, like there's a couple of guys that really, actually there's a guy that I'm so good friends with. Rwanda has really had an effect on him.
Can you tell people about Rwanda and
So the Airborne Regiment sent a platoon to Rwanda because there was I'm not even sure how big the organization was, from 2 Field Amp over there to provide medical aid in certain areas. And
is this before like the genocide took place?
Before the genocide, and then the genocide happened. And so there's some people that are still pretty affected by that. We were on was it a small arms course? That was my advanced mortar. I didn't go there, but we're watching videos, and I'm sitting in a room with everyone that had been there, and we're watching home videos, and they can smell what's on the screen.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, like, even for me, like, smell is the sense that's most tied to memory. And for the longest time when I got back, because there was a pine tree that got taken down in the mortar barrage of Srebrenica on the Easter Monday. And so the smell of pine tar, like when we come back and like the old bangy boards that you guys have probably never used, we had to resurface them with pine tar every year, or even sometimes partway through the year to seal the bottom of them because they were made of wood. And that smell was just like so strong and so tied to memory that it was like, if I closed my eyes, I could go back there. Same time, sometimes too, smell of burning garbage.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, like the first time that I remember people saying that kind of concept, it was like we're always referred to Afghanistan. But you can see that like veterans of various generations of various campaigns and wars, you know, they can relate to this concept of like what brings you back.
Yeah.
You know, to those days and times. It's very interesting. And for me, I'm interested, one, as a young person who's never been in it, and 2, as an NCO, as a sergeant, you know, as a leader, and trying to think about all these concepts of how I can be better prepared so that I can better take care of my guys and lead them, you know.
Because everything affects everyone differently.
Yeah.
Like I can think of one guy that was with us in Srebrenica, like the town was getting shelled pretty good, and we had to use our HF radio either in the morning or the afternoon, just to get the best signal out back to camping where the camp was halfway across Bosnia. And we started getting shelled, and I'm like, Mike, we got to get into the building. Like, we need to get into the building. And it's like, I can't move. Like, he physically couldn't. So he and I rode out the shelling. I mean, nothing hit the vehicle or the building, but we rode it out sitting in the back of that M113. Yeah.
Oh. Back then, how many people could relate to you from the battalion of experiencing shelling?
None.
Really? Like your deployment, your particular rotation was very
I
unique.
would say none, yeah.
That's so interesting too when you think about you come back and you have your peers and they can't, most of them would not be able to relate.
This would have been a big deployment, right?
Yeah.
And there would have been nothing, happening. Oka, which would have been before that, no shelling there, right? So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. Greg, like you've been here for a while and I'm so thankful for your time. I do want to give you an opportunity to discuss like anything you have in mind here because like I can highlight your service and your career. I know you said you had one more trip, one more deployment to the same country, Bosnia, for a third time.
Yeah.
Do you mind if you still have time, like talking about what that was like to go back for a third time?
It was better than the second time.
In what way?
In the sense that had even more of a better understanding of what was happening there. Because I had read more again to prepare. Like there was a time where, I'm sitting with this local community leader and he's, telling me X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, not to correct you on your history, but didn't the Turkish Ottoman Empire, didn't that come about over 400 years instead of like overnight? And then, just kind of like, we were Bedouins on that tour too, because I think I spent more time outside my own camp than we did in our camp. And again, just better because it was NATO and, that one was really easy. That was an easy tour.
What were you in your third deployment? Like you were a sergeant by then?
Sergeant, yeah. Group commander in mortar platoon.
Group commander in mortar platoon. Okay.
Yeah.
And
so we were QRF for the battle group for that tour. So we were also, we had also taken the OPP's riot control course for that tour.
Interesting.
Which was super fun to do. The training for that was really fun. Really fun. And then when our final exercise, the troops were like throwing hunks of 2x4 at us and PVC pipe and everything. It was a blast. It was a blast.
Nice.
Yeah.
Greg, can I ask you, like, what is it like being a leader? What was it like being a leader for you in these deployments? Because all three of them seemed like you were basically an NCO in all three of your deployments. And what was it like from your first, second, your third one, and being that leadership position? Did you do or say anything differently to your guys?
First one, learning curve was the steepest. A master corporal, right? And not a master corporal for all that long, like a couple of years, but not that long. And then coming into a completely new organization and not really knowing anyone prior to that deployment. And then just, again, like any leader, and it's in the RCR catechism somewhere where you don't ask somebody to do something you wouldn't do yourself. And really taking that to heart and listening to what your soldiers have to say. Because somebody's going to have an idea out there that's possibly better than yours. Like the second deployment, we had to set up an OP outside a house because people were kind of being terrorized at night with shotguns and that being fired at their house. And so listening to the soldiers, you come up with your order set and you do that. And then, there were some other suggestions made and like, hey, you know what, that will work better. So we will do that. But yeah, really just, and listening to what's going on around you peripherally and taking it all in because it's going to come out somewhere or be useful somewhere. And stepping back and taking that 5-10 seconds it takes to think about something before you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Greg, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been a profound experience for me, and I'm sure the guys in the room here, to hear about, what happened on those rotations and those early deployment to Bosnia, what that war campaign, if you will, was like in the beginning of it and what it turned into later.
Mm-hmm.
And like the horrors of humanity, what we were capable of doing to one another, and having to witness that and to be in a position where, you're under these constraints, right? Through the military, you can't act. And that comes with its own injuries, if you will, and kind of hardships to navigate after, leaving that place.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing. I learned a lot. I really appreciate you opening up to share this. It's not easy to talk about kind of things that are discussing the horrible traumas of humanity. Yeah, thanks, Greg. We really appreciate it. We hope that this is educational for everybody listening here. Those from your generation who might appreciate one of their own stepping into the spotlight of the regiment here to share your story. This is something I would consider to be very brave, because this is new for us. It's new for us as soldiers, especially in the RCR, to have this going on where we're sharing our experiences.
And we need to tell our stories.
Yeah.
Because as soldiers, we're pretty good at, we just did what we did because we were there.
Yeah.
But it's telling stories so that the history's known.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I even got into it on Facebook of all places one time with a guy from the regiment who said that there was only hotel company in Srebrenica. And I'm like, yeah, look at your honors and awards page at these names and you'll see differently. And they got radio silence because we don't know what happens in the different battalions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I really think that we need to share our oral history as well as our written history, because like I said before, traditions and history matter.
They do. It's tied into our identity of who we are, Actually, Greg, before you leave, you became a nurse.
I did.
Can you tell us why? What was it?
I was coming up on 20 years in my 20-year mark, and it was like I need to do something where I'm going to be employable after. I had been turned down actually by the OPP a couple years before because I didn't play sports in high school. I had no leadership potential, but I was a sergeant, and I didn't have enough community involvement. But I had 3 young kids, and it was right around Ice Storm 98 and Tour 98. So I was away from home 9 and 12 months that year. And then...
What? They didn't think you had enough leadership experience after being in fucking Bosnia in 92?
So, yeah. So...
what kind of fucking experience did you be in the OPP back then?
So then I'd always had a medical interest.
Yeah.
And so then I applied to the practical nursing program here in Pembroke.
Okay.
Got accepted. And like I said earlier, I was in uniform one day and 2 weeks later I was in school.
Wow.
And then I've been at the hospital here in Pembroke since 2007, 12 years in the emergency department. And now I'm in an administrative role, but still nursing some days when needed. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. Greg, listen, thank you for your service, both in the military and what you do right now, for your community, for Ontario, your country. It's something that makes me proud about being who I am in the RCR. And what people in our community do after service as well, because that's another story. In a lot of people's lives. And for all the members who are serving right now, these are chapters that are going to happen in our story down the road.
Absolutely.
Greg, I'll leave it to you for any final words.
God, I don't know that I have any. Just that thank you for letting me come and share my story or stories. And I think it's important that we share them and not just not just for the public in general, like somebody that's going to look at this podcast, but like within the regiment itself.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of stuff that gets missed. But I think us old guys out there do have some stories, some history that ties to what's happening to today. And a lot of us are willing to tell it. And even attending things like the mess dinner, I thought was great. I mean, I hadn't been to one in quite a number of years. And yeah, it was great to sit and chat and tell stories and say what my medals were for and whatnot, and ask people what their medals were for. Because with soldiers, we can get along and tell stories to each other, and we're always inquisitive of what's going on with each other.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
For everybody listening, stay tuned. This was a treat. Today's guest was Sergeant retired Greg Tate, who is now actively serving as a nurse in his community in Renfrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you.